Hi, I am Jennifer Davis. I am a plant-based physician, and I'm excited to share one of my favorite recipes with you today. I have to say, when I became plant-based about 12 years ago, my kids were 7 and 9, so they weren't that excited for the transition. So I had to come up with some recipes that the whole family would love, and this is one of their favorite recipes. So I'm gonna make a plant-based lasagna. So to start, I am going to use some red lentils. I love red lentils because they cook really quickly. And so it just takes a couple of minutes, and they add additional protein because a lot of times people are concerned, and especially with growing children and athletes, about the protein content when you become plant-based. So I'm putting a cup of red lentils, and I'm gonna add 3 cups of water so that they can boil. So this recipe is, I always try to make the recipe, and my thought is that we'll have leftovers, but it's one that tends to get eaten all at one time. So I don't have leftovers afterwards. Hopefully you'll enjoy it as much. So I'm going to put those to boil, and while those boil, I'm going to make my marinara sauce. So I love this recipe because it's really, really tasty. It's from the New York Times. It's Lydia, if you're familiar with. She's an Italian chef. And then I'm actually just going to smash. Quickest way to get the cloves loose here. And it calls for actually 7 cloves of garlic. It's a really simple recipe. But the flavor actually comes from the garlic. It's pretty amazing. So I have 2 heads of garlic here. They're actually, if you look at these cloves, they're pretty large. So I'm gonna fudge it and use probably 8 of these cloves, since I'm using 2 cans of marinara sauce. Whole peeled tomatoes. Sorry. Little tough these cloves are, but these, when I did my shopping, I actually shopped all at the local farm, Clearbrook Farms, which is great that we have so many amazing local fresh ingredients close by. So these are young fresh garlic. So, and then I'm just gonna slice them into thin slices so it gets all that deep garlic flavor. Garlic is great because it has so many amazing healing properties in addition to tasting amazing. So it is a great anti-inflammatory ingredient. It also helps with your gut microbiome, which is really important, we know, for overall health. So it's a great way to add some nutrition, but also, of course, all that amazing flavor. I'm just going to thinly slice them all. Separate out all my leaves here. Usually I just smash them and just get all that flavor out really quickly. But for this recipe, they call for the thin slicing, so it's really nice to get that extra flavor. In the meantime, let me see if if you see my lentils are starting to boil here. I'm just going to keep them on a low simmer until they're cooked all the way through. They really just take about 10 minutes to be fully cooked. And they're going to go in the sauce, which is a great way to add more body to the plant-based recipe, and then that additional protein that I was telling you about. Lentils are packed with protein and fiber, which is also a good, important part of your diet. So it makes it filling, but again, it's also really good for you. Let's smash this garlic. Sometimes taking the skin off the garlic is the hardest part of the whole recipe. There's a couple other ways to get the skin off a little bit easier. You could actually just put all the cloves together in a jar and shake them up. If you don't like to get deep into the garlic and get the garlic flavor all over you. But I just like to cut it this way. Peel it all off. Just stirring to make sure they don't get stuck on the bottom, and also just that they cook evenly, which is important. Okay, so now I'm going to use some whole peeled tomatoes that I rinsed the tops, but they have more flavor, you know, than the crushed. And then I'm just going to crush them by hand, actually, to get all that flavor. Use some in my bowl here. Just going to put a little bit of water to get the rest of the what's left in the, about a cup of water just to add to that. And I'll do that with this can too. It's always good to have a little extra sauce. So usually one can should be sufficient for the lasagna, but sometimes, at least my family likes to add extra to the finished product. So I always make a little extra. And it's also good to have some for the next meal. So I'll pour those in. A little bit more water. So I am just going to actually crush them by hand just to break up the, to smaller pieces. And then I'm going to get a saucepan. So that's good. It's crushed pretty small there. Wash my hands off. I think my lentils are almost done here. So I'm going to use a quarter cup of olive oil. Usually when I cook, I try to, when I'm sauteing things, I actually use water or vegetable broth. But for this recipe, just to get that, add to the flavor, it does call for olive oil. I'm actually going to use a half a cup because it is double the recipe. So there we go. I'm just going to heat that a little bit before I add the garlic there. I like to get them really soft. So actually, another trick with children is if you can hide it, then they don't mind. So when I'm adding the lentils, when they get really, really soft, they just basically blend into the sauce and they don't even notice that it's there. And like I said, it gives it that extra body and the additional protein. So it's really good. These are probably a little bit thicker than I normally make them, but they add, like I said, a lot of good flavor to the sauce. I'm just going to get them in there, get them sizzling a little bit, and then I will add the tomatoes. And the great thing about this sauce is, like, you always think that when you make it that it takes so long, but this one is really quick. It just needs a couple minutes to cook, so I love that. And it just adds so much more flavor. The other way you can do this lasagna is use a prepared sauce. And I just always make sure that the ingredients are good. So it's always really important to read the labels whenever you're using something that's pre-prepared. Make sure it doesn't have too much salt, because that is a lot of times when things are shelf stable, they add a lot of salt as a preservative. So you always want to make sure that you check those ingredients. And you want to make sure that it really is just tomatoes, maybe a little bit of seasoning, and maybe a little bit of oil. But again, you want to try to limit that as much as possible. So it smells really good if you can smell the fragrant So I'm going to add the tomatoes now. Like, you just want it to sizzle. I don't want it to get brown. So that is good enough. And then I'm just going to add this. And really, that's pretty much the sauce. I will let this saute for a few minutes, or simmer for a few minutes, I should say. And the color will change. It's a nice dark red now. It'll get a little bit lighter, and then that's when I'll know that it's ready to go. I'll put this on a stick. Let's save my spoon. So in the meantime, I'm gonna make my tofu. I love using the local ingredients, so I found this great tofu that's actually made right here in Vermont. So I'm gonna use that. It's really good. So now the lentils, you can see they're almost soft there. So first step is with tofu is just to dry it. A lot of times when they prepare it, it just has a little, it's packaged in a little bit of water. So I just want to dry that off a little bit before I get started. And then I'm going to use some cashews. There. So this recipe calls for a cup of cashews. And I'm going to blend the cashews first. Cashews are a great, another great ingredient I love because they're so versatile. They're soft, so they can be blended really easily. And you can use them. I use them a lot of times to even make cream or like cashew milk. And they, like I said, the flavor is very mild. So they're good to use in a variety of different recipes. You can use them savory. I use them in a lot of desserts as well, depending on how I season it. So with this, I'm going to blend the cashews first, and then so that they are kind of like a fine powder. So you can see now they're like a fine powder, so that's good. And the recipe also calls for nutritional yeast, which is a common ingredient in a lot of plant-based recipes. It's great because it is nutritional. It has vitamin B12, which most plant foods don't have, so that's a good supplement. But it also adds kind of a cheesy flavor. So a lot of recipes that call for cheese will use this. I use it to make macaroni and cheese. I use it to make ricotta, like I said, and sometimes, varieties. If I make like a cashew cheese as well. So it's a really good ingredient to have. And this recipe calls for a quarter of a cup, which I'm going to use the cup that has a little bit of oil. So a quarter of a cup of nutritional yeast. It doesn't have to be exact, as you can tell. It's more for flavor. And that, is easy actually to find. They have it in the grocery store, usually like in the baking section. I'm also going to add a little bit of salt and just a little bit to bring out the flavors. So about a quarter of a teaspoon to a half a teaspoon. Some oregano. I will use a teaspoon of oregano. And then a little basil as well. And sometimes I do fresh garlic in here, or you can get garlic powder. So whichever you have around. Since I used all my garlic in my sauce, I will use some garlic powder. So that's about a tablespoon of that as well. Just gonna do that. Okay, I think that's about good. And my lentils are done there. And then I'm gonna add the tofu here. So I'm gonna use my paper towel. I just take it out and I'm just gonna pat it dry a little bit to take some of the moisture out. That's it. And then I'm just gonna crumble it a little bit. And I'm just gonna pulse it to mix it so that it's all mixed really well. I'm gonna add my little lemon juice. Try to squeeze it without getting the pits in. Actually, I have my juicer at home, so it helps me sort, but otherwise, if you squeeze upside down, then it kind of holds the pits on the top. So I use about a tablespoon, which again, I'm sorry, I'm not measuring, a tablespoon of lemon juice, just to give that little bit more tartness to the cheese. I'm just gonna pulse it a few more times. And that's a pretty good consistency. Okay, so that's my tofu ricotta there. So I think that I should be close to ready for my sauce should be good here. And we're almost ready to assemble. Just gonna give that a couple more minutes. And then I'm actually gonna take a little bit of the extra water out of the lentils real quick, if there is a strainer. Yeah. Just so it doesn't add any additional moisture to the sauce and take away any of the flavor. So most of the water is out, but just to get that little bit of extra. Which it's actually pretty dry already. Okay. I guess it's dry. Okay. So once that sauce is done, I'm going to add these lentils back in there. So it's a nice orange color now, which means that it is ready. This stove setup I'm not used to. So I am going to clear off my area here, so I'll get ready to assemble the lasagna right here. So you can see the steps. So I'm gonna add the lentils here. I'm gonna do it carefully because this pot's already pretty full. I'm going to stir it very carefully, but so that it's well mixed in. It smells really good. If you can, it's too bad you guys can't smell it. The garlic really adds a lot to it. So it's pretty well mixed there. Okay. So that's ready to go. So now I'm going to use, these are the lasagna noodles I chose. I usually try to choose a whole grain lasagna noodle. These actually are gluten-free as well. They're brown rice, just because it adds additional nutrition. Always try to go for the least processed form of the grains. So if they have whole wheat, or sometimes I choose like this brown rice, or there's another one I really like that has, it's a lentil, yellow lentil and brown rice pasta. So it's great though, because normally you think if it's whole grain, it has that, you don't, the consistency, sometimes my family does not like so much, but these noodles are great. And especially because it's when it's in the lasagna with all the other different flavors and textures, they don't really notice, and it tastes just as good, especially with all the flavor from the sauce and all the other ingredients in there. So I am going to open this. So I actually didn't rinse my, so I also try to add additional veggies whenever I can. So this, again, is a great opportunity to add some greens. Sometimes I use kale even. I chop it really small and massage it a little bit before I put it in so it has a good consistency. But this is spinach, which is, is really good nutrition-wise, but also it mixes in well with the lasagna. So I'm just going to give it a little rinse. Okay. So I think we're ready to assemble. And then I usually do add some fresh basil or parsley. They had parsley at the farm, so I bought some parsley today. I will just break up a few pieces of it and just kind of sprinkle it as I go to add a little bit more flavor. Okay. So, So first, and the other thing, I never cook the noodles first, which is great. When you do a lasagna, you can always, pretty much any noodle, you can no bake it. Basically, because the moisture from the veggies and also from the sauce is going to cook the noodles, and you're baking it. I usually seal the pan well with tinfoil while it's cooking, and then it's fine. You don't need to do that. So move everything out of the way a little bit. I don't know if you can see. Okay. So I'm going to start with a little bit of sauce on the bottom. So cover the bottom first. Okay. And I just put them however they fit. They're all different shapes, that's the one thing. So sometimes they fit perfectly, and this fits pretty well. So leave a little space around so it can expand, because it's going to expand while you cook, while it bakes. And then I'm going to start with my spatula. Okay. Putting my ricotta down. I think I have an extra utensil somewhere. Just use this. It's a little sticky. So you take kind of half the amount of the ricotta for one layer and then the other for the next layer, and you spread it as well. Could have used a little more water sometimes to thin it out, depending on the consistency you like. Doesn't have to be perfect, because when it cooks, it all mixes really nicely in there. Good flavor. Make sure I cover the whole noodle. Okay. Now I'm just going to throw a ton of spinach in here, which is great because you can basically cover the whole lasagna, fill the whole lasagna with a lot of veggies. And you can use different veggies too, but spinach is good because, again, the flavor is mild. So when you have children, if they aren't excited about veggies like mine are not always, or weren't always, now they're better. Just put a little parsley in there. And then I'm going to add more sauce. Okay. I'm just going to cover the whole layer with the sauce. That's good. Some more lasagna noodles. That one's broken. And then one more layer of ricotta. If they also make some prepared plant-based ricottas, which are pretty good, but sometimes they have some added oil, which is great about this one is that it doesn't have the added oil in it. Which oil is fine, but when you're having you have to consider when you're making things that are plant-based, they generally have fewer calories. So then when you're adding the oil, which ends up being proportionally many more calories than what the actual dish is, or adds a lot additional calories. So the proportion is higher. So I just try to stay away from too much added oil because it is not necessarily as nutritious as, a whole food. So like a nut, as opposed to the oil where most of the nutrition has been removed and you're just left with the one component of it, which is, like I said, in some cases, if you just want it for the flavor, like in the sauce, or if you're making a special dressing and it's just a little finish, but as a major component, I try to not use as much. And definitely in people that are trying to lose weight, or if you have medical concerns, it's a good thing to try to avoid. The same with actually the recipe. I did use a little bit of salt in here, but you could pretty much eliminate the salt and not really miss it, because again, with the garlic and all the other fresh veggies and things like that, it has enough seasoning, enough flavor, I should say, that you don't need that. So I'm going to add a little bit more spinach here. And then I was going to say, you notice the noodles curl a little bit. They don't have, some of the other noodles that you buy have some, have different preservatives, and a lot of times they will hold the shape a little bit better. But these, once it cooks, it's all the same. It'll cook nicely. Doesn't really matter. It will look pretty in the end. So that is that. So another bit of sauce to cover. And then I'll add my last layer. And then it takes about an hour to cook. I always find that the lasagna tastes better the next day if it can make it to the next day, because all the flavors meld and then it's really, really flavorful. Just making sure all the... Okay. I'm gonna put one more layer, and then I'm gonna top it with a little bit of sauce. And then I'll cook it like this for about 40 minutes. And after that, I'm gonna add, I do have a little bit of a vegan cheese, mozzarella, that I'll put a little bit on top, but that's usually towards the end of the cooking time. So now it's all covered. I want to make sure all of those corners are covered so then they can cook well. And it's nice and soft when it comes out. So now I'm just going to cover it with some tin foil here. And then I think the oven's ready, and it'll cook for about an hour. At about 40 minutes, I will take it out so that I can add the finish it. I'm gonna open the door first. To be careful with the hot ingredients because it's a little just put it in the middle of the oven. I put it in the oven. It's going to cook for about 40 minutes. After the 40 minutes, I'm going to add the mozzarella. So we'll be back then so I can show you. Great. I think it's ready now. I smell it. So I think it's probably ready to add the mozzarella to it. It smells so good. Oops. There we go. I close the... So let's see. So you always have to be really careful when removing it because there will be a lot of steam. So look at that. So now I'm just going to sprinkle a little bit of this vegan mozzarella, which is actually, the ingredients are pretty good. It has some coconut oil as the fat source. So I'm just going to sprinkle a little to cover it around. And then I'll just cook it for a couple more minutes. Just needs about 10 more minutes. And it's pretty much completely done. I can add a little more. So it's all covered. You don't have to add the actual mozzarella. I actually like it without it. It just adds that extra gooey texture that you're used to with the lasagna. So let me open the oven again. I'll just put it in for another 10 minutes and then we should be good to go. And it just needs to cook with the top off now, and we'll just watch. I'll keep checking to make sure that the cheese melts. It should get a little bit of a melt, which is kind of neat, even though it is plant-based. So we'll come back when it's completely done. Okay, I think it's time to take it out of the oven. Let's see how it looks. So it didn't melt as much as normal. It melted a little, but I think we're ready. Looks pretty yummy, huh? Sometimes if you keep it covered, the steam actually helps it melt a little bit more. And also I cooked on convection, so the air kind of dried it out. But it looks like it's ready to cut. So I was saying that my family loves this recipe. It is definitely one of their favorites because we became plant-based about it's been about 12 years now. And actually, the reason that I initially became plant-based was because of the environmental implications of the meat industry. And that's, oops, let's see how we look here. Ooh, I think that came out pretty good. Now I would take a bite, but it's kind of steaming hot. So I think I have to wait a little while for that to cool down before I take a bite out of it. But this has been amazing cooking here. This kitchen is incredible. And I've had so much fun showing you all my favorite dish. But you know what? You can also do it here yourselves if you were interested in coming to GNAT-TV to cook. So this dish, like I said, is our favorite. And one of the reasons we did, as I became plant-based, I told you initially for the climate. But once I realized, I actually watched a movie called Forks Over Knives, and I realized the implications of what we eat on our health. And so I've become even more passionate about it as a way of life. So the great thing about plant-based is that it's nutrient dense, so it's filled with tons of nutrients. You know, you think when you're eating, all the vegetables are filled with vitamins and minerals and antioxidants, and they're just really so good for you. But also they are low in calories and low in fat, which a lot of, unfortunately, the diseases that I see as a physician are related to these things like high cholesterol and type 2 diabetes. So it's great to be able to eat amazingly food that tastes so good, but also is really good for your body and nourishes your body. So I hope that you'll see that actually, if you try this recipe, that you'll realize how great it is and how good you can feel while eating it. So hopefully you'll try it.